Welcome to the For Love and Money podcast, the show where business and social purpose meet to inspire a movement for positive change. Here's your host, Carolyn Butler-Madden.
Our guest today is someone I've been trying to get on this podcast for almost a year, so I'm super excited to introduce you to Emma Freivogel. Emma is the founder of Radical Recruit, a London-based not-for-profit recruitment consultancy that exists to excite, agitate, and shake things up in the recruitment industry. If you love this episode, which I think you're going to want to follow Emma on LinkedIn, where she is active in exciting, agitating, and shaking things up big time. Radical Recruit represents the UK's most diverse hidden talent. It helps employers do recruitment better and creates real and lasting social change. I'm going to share Emma's own words on why she started Radical Recruit. I began Radical because I believe it is time to boldly and unapologetically challenge the status quo. It is time to redress the imbalance of opportunity afforded to those labelled care leaver, disabled, gang member, black, uneducated, inexperienced, homeless, criminal, or generally just not good enough. It is time to call out businesses who talk a big game when it comes to their commitment to equality, but whose policies fail to translate into practice. I am Radical. Emma has brought together a community of like-minded people from disparate backgrounds to champion the business and ethical case for change to the way businesses source, recruit, and develop hidden talent. Founded in October 2019, Radical has placed over 480 radicals into jobs that they love. During this time, they've also worked with hundreds of brands, helping them reimagine their traditional candidate attraction and engagement methods, run fairer, more equitable recruitment processes, recruit radical people, and support them to flourish in their chosen careers. Emma, welcome to the For Love and Money podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to meet you and lovely to be speaking with you.
So thinking about purpose in business, and I know, thinking about the clients you serve in business, what role do you think love has to play, if any, at all?
I think it's a really good question. For me, I grew up in a family where I always knew I was loved. We didn't have loads of money. My dad worked his bum off. My mum came from pretty tumultuous circumstances and she didn't have a lot of love in her life growing up. But I was always a young person or an adult, still am, almost an old lady.
Hardly.
Very, very loved. And I think for me personally, having that love afforded me a whole load of opportunities to believe in myself, to go to university, to get a career, to love other people. And I think love is something that no matter who you are or what background you come from or what circumstances you were born into or what opportunities you're afforded in life, love is the one thing that everyone needs. You can be the richest person and not have any love and be missing out on the most beautiful thing the human experience has to offer. So for me, love is absolutely integral to living a good life. And love is something that, in terms of my business and the way we operate, I think if you strip it all back, is essential to what we do at Radical.
100%, because it comes down to love of humanity, doesn't it? Love of your fellow human being.
Yeah, absolutely. And love for yourself. I think, we do a lot of work around teaching people like self-compassion and teaching people to be compassionate towards others. A big part of loving, I think, being kind, being fair, being equitable, just caring. I think that's what love is to me. And that's sort of, fundamentally what we're all about at Radical.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Emma, can you share your background story that led you to where you are today with Radical Recruit?
Certainly. So I have, I think this must be my 17th or 18th year working, and throughout my career I've always worked with what I term the underdogs of society. So I I followed in my mother's footsteps. She was a support worker and a teacher's aide for young people with disabilities. And then she moved into education and works in sort of economically deprived, pretty tough areas, now in New Zealand, previously in Melbourne. And I always sort of was taught, I don't remember sort of having explicit conversations about this, but that everyone's like equal and it doesn't matter what skin color you are or how able you are to do one thing or another. That everyone had the right to exist and be valued members of the community. So I kind of like fell into disability and sort of was born with the gift of the gab and very quickly moved into leadership roles within the disability space. And then, after my first leadership role, moved into lots of other sort of areas, like I managed a hostel for 10 predominantly men with alcohol and other drug-related brain injury who came out of prison. And then I moved into sensory impairment. Then I moved into physical disability. And then I did some, work with people in the community and sort of community centre settings and these types of things. And people, or the underdog, quickly became my passion. I lived and breathed sort of social justice. I had a really strong sense of right and wrong, often to my detriment. And before I founded Radical, I was in between jobs and I applied to volunteer with an organisation called Working Chance, who support women coming out of prison and also care leavers to find work and reintegrate into the community, not reoffend, and be financially autonomous and these types of things. And I did that for about 2 years, and in my COO role, played a very small part in supporting 400 odd women move into employment. But throughout my tenure, I became acutely aware of the fact that the team, although our remit was to recruit for big business, and prepare these women to transition into the world of work. And although we had all the goodwill in the world, we didn't do it very well. So what happened was that we brokered opportunities for some incredibly talented, sometimes often very experienced women that just didn't align with their, recruitment preferences, didn't afford them opportunities to earn a real living wage, much less a salary that was sort of commensurate with what they brought to the recruitment table. We often sort of applied a sling mud at hope some of it sticks approach, because we didn't really understand as a team the mechanics of recruitment or what it took to work with, often big corporates who needed a short list of people in 5 days, no excuses, the pace at which organizations needed us to work. We just couldn't match it. And so what that meant was we often put forward people for roles that they didn't want or couldn't do because we hadn't vetted them properly and these types of things. And often that would set the women up to fail. So either they got the role and they didn't sustain their placement, or they got the role, but actually they weren't earning enough to live a good life. And, they lacked career progression opportunities in these types of things. And I found myself speaking at the most wonderful conference, the Reward Gateway Engagement Excellence Summit. They do it every year. And if you can get there, if you're sort of London-based or UK-based, go, because it's fantastic. And the conference was themed HR Rebels. And I was speaking on a panel with 2 other people. So one was Ollie, who was the head of people at Honest Burgers, a brand that most Londoners will know, or most UK people will know because they're quite big now. And also the first woman I ever met, Chanel, who I'd been tasked with sort of cobbling together a CV a few weeks before she was due to be released from prison. And we were telling that the panel was themed what's possible when the third sector and the business community unite in common purpose. And we were talking about Chanel's story. We were telling Chanel's story from a different perspective. And the room was packed. The room had it was one of the most popular sessions of the day. And Chanel was talking about the fact that she had been born into really tumultuous circumstances. And I'll give you some examples of what I mean by that. She was one of 13 siblings, a Black family. She was born into the West Midlands, and her parents were from feuding gangs. Her mum was an alcoholic and drug user, and her father was a prolific criminal. And she was severely neglected and abused. And I mean, the things that happened to her, you don't even see in horror movies. They were so unfathomable to me. She was starved and beaten, and all sorts of terrible things happened to her. And then she and her siblings were taken into the care of the state. And I use care in that context very loosely, because it's another really broken system over here. And during that time, she became homeless on several occasions and found herself having to prostitute herself out to earn money to eat. These really awful things happened to Chanel until she was recruited into her father's gang and made to do horrible things. And she had, when I met her, she'd been in prison serving a custodial sentence of 6 years, the end of a 6-year sentence, for arson. And when I spoke to her, she sort of explained all of these things as she was explaining on the panel. But she was also talking about the fact that she founded a bakery or a catering service called Down the Cake Hole. It's pretty clever. And she'd been catering all of these events for the governor, for our organisation as well, and for the other events that were run at the prison. And she trained a couple of what we call lifers over here, so women with life sentences, to take over the running of the bakery and upskill them. Anyway, she's telling this story, and she was saying things like, for the first time in, I don't know, a couple of years, I think it was about 18 months after she'd been released, we're talking on the panel, that she hadn't sort of reoffended, that she had used those skills she acquired in prison to go and secure a job in the outside world, that one introduction to one employer who just happened to taste a piece of her carrot cake and thought it was brilliant led to a job opportunity she never anticipated she'd ever get. And then she was saying things like, I've got a safe home, I feel a part of a community, I have friends, I feel loved, I feel safe. All these things that take for granted as a person who wasn't born into those same circumstances and who lived a bloody privileged life, as far as I'm concerned. And most of the people in the room couldn't say they weren't privileged in comparison to Chanel. And then she said, I'm training to be a head chef. So within sort of 16 odd months, she'd gone from, the dish pig to someone who was quite senior in the team and had a really hopeful outlook on life. And I just had this aha moment. I was like, bloody hell, literally all it took was one introduction to one employer and a piece of carrot cake. And this woman was flourishing after, 25 years of crime and prison and poverty. And I went away from that conference and I just thought, fucking hell, if this works and I'd worked with loads of different people who were really vulnerable for lots of different reasons, but she was, I think, and probably still is, the most uniquely vulnerable person I've ever supported. If this sort of model if employment can help mobilize someone out of the most desperate and hopeless situations into a place where, they have a life to look forward to and to build on, then why couldn't it work for a similar model, a better model, a more radical model? Why couldn't that work for, men coming out of prison? Why couldn't it work for people with disabilities? Why couldn't it work for gang-afflicted young people? Why couldn't it work for homeless folk, domestic violence survivors? All these people that find mainstream recruitment consultancy largely inaccessible and for which the third sector ecology is not equipped to represent because they just don't know recruitment. So that's how radical was sort of founded. That's the backstory. I went to the pub after the conference. I'm a really cheap date and I get drunk very easily. I ordered one large glass of red wine. I never drink by myself. And I sat in this pub because I was just buzzing. I was like, and the audience were like, wow, they were so interested. Like, I've never pitched so many people and being so warmly received. I think thanks to Chanel and her vulnerability and the way she spoke. I mean, she was so articulate and brave and courageous, like all the things that employers look for that just can't be taught, really. Like the determination and grit and just like, I don't know, she's just a special woman. She pitched this room and people were like, oh my God, we need to do more of this. It sounds great. Yeah, so I went to the pub and, scribbled down what is now our manifesto. And that's sort of how Radical began.
That's an extraordinary story. And yeah, I mean, like you say, a carrot cake and an opportunity to share her story and, what that led to. And I guess it's like the fact that she was fortunate to find someone who was open to it, who could open the door for her. And that's all that most people want. That's all that most people need, is a chance to get beyond, what they see, the barriers that they see that don't open the door to any further opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I think people who live with, the label ex-offender or homeless or domestic violence survivor or returned veteran or whatever, they often come with gaps in their CV. And I think that broadly speaking, or at least here in the UK, if you have a gap in your CV that's longer than 3 months, it tends to be discarded in the bin and you're on the talent scrap heap. And you don't really get a look in. I think that's changed slightly because of the pandemic and the fact that it resulted in mass redundancies and people going on furlough and this sort of thing. But broadly speaking, if you haven't got a steady, track record of work experience on your CV, you're viewed through a lens of mistrust, as if you're, a dirty job hopper or someone who can't keep a job or is not loyal or whatever. And that's just not the case for a lot of people. So I think that's one of the things that we really try to change, is that perception amongst employers. But I think actually, 3 years down the line, because I didn't know about recruitment. I knew nothing about recruitment 3 years ago. I still know nothing probably, and I've got loads and loads to learn. But thankfully, I've got a team of people from corporate who understand how big business operates and what they require from recruitment partners. But one of the things that I've learned is also, yes, there's a piece around the label and how that restricts access to the labour market because of, bias and perceptions. But there's so many more barriers in the way. And actually, they can be attributed to the fact that organisations, especially the big ones, haven't changed the way they recruit for 30 odd years. And they're still relying on the same engagement and attraction methodologies. And unfortunately, at least here in the UK, we've got a talent short market. There aren't enough people to do the jobs that are open at the moment. And what that means is organisations are having to go back to basics and really think about the fundamentals of their strategy, recruitment strategy, and reimagine what they usually do so it's fit for purpose. And one of the things that they're not doing very well is attraction and engagement. And I'll give you an example. 1 in 7 people over here are neurodivergent. So that might mean that they're dyslexic, they could be dyspraxic, they could have ADD, ADHD, they could be autistic, any number of neurodivergent conditions, or a combination of both. And often what that means is reading a job advert, which, let's face it, mostly they read like job specs, really. No, the difference between job advert and a job spec isn't often understood. So it's just like this long list of demands and big, dense, heavy chunks of text. And they're just simply not accessible for a neurodivergent brain often. So we do a lot of work with the partners that we work with to look at how they attract talent. And often that means stripping back their crappily written adverts to make them neurodivergent friendly. Or, for women, if they're wanting to attract more women, to run it through a gender decoder and remove the gender biased language, or it could be looking at where they place their ads. I mean, not everyone who's seeking a job is on LinkedIn, you know. So looking at different ways to find jobs. So yeah, the label piece and the, you know, gap on the CV and the often traumatic experience is one thing, but there's a whole raft of other considerations that employers, I think up until recently, haven't been considering when it comes to like attracting diverse talent, because they haven't have to.
Yeah.
Because there's because there's like a, if I can be so crude, I think there's sort of a collective arrogance amongst the business community, especially big business. Like, why don't people want to come and work for us? Well, the answer is really simple. For the last 10, 20, possibly decades, years and years and years, you've not considered these people as viable candidates, and you've literally discarded them, you know, because you have other options. And now all of a sudden you're committed to diversity. Oh God, that phrase is so, you know,
tell me about
hat.
that. Tell me about that commitment to diversity, because obviously, you know, it's a big thing on the agenda at the moment of business. How real is it?
It's a good question. I think if I think about the landscape now for radical people versus 3 years ago, I think it's really different. I mean, worlds apart. I think there is a much better understanding of what diversity achieves through a business. If you look at it through a commercial lens, like we know diverse businesses are more agile. We know they're better at problem solving. We know that they provide better customer service. We know that the bottom line of businesses, it tends to be better if a diverse staff is present in an organization. We know that they tend to problem solve better through times of change. There's a body of evidence that and it's been available for decades to prove that diverse businesses perform better. I think that because, you know, three things have happened that have changed the way business leaders, I think, well, actually the world broadly, but also especially the UK community, think about diversity. I think, you know, when George Floyd was murdered, the world just stood still and had this racial equity awakening. I don't know why it took George Floyd's murder for this to happen, because Black people have been murdered for centuries and centuries and centuries, and you know, people were like, shit, something needs to change now. We need to take some positive action and level the playing field, and you know, racial equity has to be atop of the agenda. I think that the fact that the pandemic, no one came out of the pandemic unscathed. We've all experienced the trauma of COVID, and we all understand that the people who were disproportionately and adversely impacted were those with protected characteristics. I'm talking about women, I'm talking about young people, I'm talking about, you know, over 50s, Black and other ethnic minorities, the queer community. They were the ones that most the plague was most devastating for, but also everyone else is a hell of a lot closer to the breadline than we expected or knew we were. So I think certainly over here, you know, we had time to think about like what is our reality, and then also the reality of others. And I think for me, certainly, and lots of the people that I know in my circles, and if you look at LinkedIn during that time, people looking for like meaning and purpose and ways to give back and love each other, bringing it back to this podcast, like finding ways to love each other, make the world a better place and tackle the issues that, you know, government couldn't or wouldn't. So yeah, there was this like change in the way businesses operated, and they sort of were shifting towards a more purpose-driven, ethical, socially responsible model, which has become the norm. And then on an individual level, I think you've got far more championship or an allyship of Black people, of queer people, of whoever, homeless folk, on account of people realizing that actually we're so much more vulnerable than we thought we were because of the pandemic. And then you've got Brexit, of course, that's caused this huge skills gap and certainly a labour shortage in so many industries over here in the UK, and I think probably everywhere, that has meant that there's another sort of reason why businesses need to look at untapped talent and find people to fill their roles in from less traditional backgrounds. So those three things have really changed the landscape. And all of those people are diverse by virtue of having sort of a protected characteristic or a diverse experiences means they think differently and they do things differently to your sort of pale, stale male, CEO John. I think we're just and also businesses looking at diversity through like a socioeconomic lens as well. So you've got people with protections under the law, but also people with life experience that make them diverse. And they're typically people who've experienced sort of poverty or symptoms of poverty, like domestic violence, like drugs and alcohol, like homelessness, these types of things, contact with the criminal justice, contact with the care system. So it's changed.
And that's got to bring such a different perspective to businesses, because we have had such a cookie cutter approach, haven't we, in business? We've had businesses that really look at the safe option and a very narrow field of candidates, and it limits businesses, I think, in so many ways, because it limits empathy, for people in society, and those people might be your employees, they might be your customers, but it just gives you a really narrow scope of what life looks like for people. So when you get...
I totally agree. I mean, I think lots of businesses are recruiting more of the same because they're doing exactly what they used to do when it comes to attracting, engaging, recruiting, developing talent. There's no doubt about it. And I think, it's all well and good to set a diversity target, but that's the outcome of the work that you need to do. And if you don't do the work, you will never achieve the outcome. The number of times I've read on LinkedIn, by some bigwig CEO, we're committed to equality. And we've achieved 27% diversity, a 27% representation of women in our senior roles. And it's like, well, that's not equality. That's just better representation.
And
they often haven't done a lot of the work they need to do to achieve real diversity. And
do you call them out, Emma?
Sometimes. I think there's a fine line between alienating potential partners and calling them out. So I think, and a very sort of, you've got to be a little bit diplomatic about the way you do it. And I've mellowed over the years and had to learn that the hard way. So I used to call bullshit. But I was a little bit more naive back then. I still call bullshit, but in different ways. They tend to be go on my lead list, and I'll have a quiet word with them to talk about what we can do to help them really achieve equality rather than just talk about it. But there's a lot of rhetoric out there and a lack of action as far as we're concerned. The one thing that we've realized is that I think there is an appetite to and an understanding of the importance of achieving greater diversity, but organizations don't know how to go about it. And it's often still a nice to have rather than an imperative. And what that means is it isn't treated with the same seriousness as other sort of considerations like managing risk or managing finance or whatever it is, PR or whatever. And it really should be, because I think if it was everyone's responsibility, if people didn't do their part to diversify or create, inclusive spaces where people feel like they belong, or run fair recruitment processes, or, recruitment campaigns that attract and engage a really broad audience. If they didn't do that and they got the sack, or they could get the sack, then I think a lot more work would be done to, bolster the strategy and achieve the goals of diversity plans and campaigns. But I mean, you just got to chip away, don't you?
Enjoying the podcast? If you're looking for more inspiration, head to our website, thecauseeffect.com.au, for more resources on how you can start using your business as a force for good. or buy the For Love and Money book. Every copy sold allows us to protect 1 square metre of rainforest. Help us save 10,000 square metres by 2025.
I remember you telling me when we first started talking, nearly a year ago, that when you started the organisation, you wondered whether you get enough clients. But the reality was pretty quickly that you couldn't deliver on the demand. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I mean, I think the landscape's changed so much. I can't tell you how different it is for our radicals. The opportunities we're opening up, and the types of businesses we're working with now versus 3 years ago, there was apart. I mean, my first year, I got a grant, depending on how Australian I'm feeling. We got a grant.
She's waking up, the caffeine's kicking in.
Yeah, thank gosh for that. We got a grant that sort of enabled me to live off 2-minute noodles and pilot the project for the first 12 months. And at that time, I didn't have a team around me. I had no networks with the business world. I knew nothing about recruitment other than how not to do it. And I'd only personally I worked with crappy recruiters, so I didn't even know what good looked like. Anyway, because we didn't need to earn an income in order to pilot the project, and because I was repping, people with those labels, ex-offender, homeless, care leavers, who often didn't have a great deal of experience, or who weren't perceived as being viable candidates, I was begging for vacancies and doing the work for free just so I could prove the model worked. And very quickly, I mean, in my first year, I think I did about 65 placements by myself, which was pretty damn good. And then we got some funding from the GLA just before year 2 started, the Greater London Authority, that is, to work with a heap of rough sleepers, about 65 of them, who've been literally picked up off the streets in what was called the Everybody In campaign. So it was a campaign run by government in partnership with homeless charities, and in the name of public safety, a huge, in the 90% range of rough sleepers across the nation were picked up off the streets and given accommodation. They literally solved the problem of rough sleeping overnight. And so I was commissioned to work with about 65 men and women, predominantly men. I think we had 2 women in the cohort, and they were people with no recourse to public funds, didn't speak a bloody word of English often, had no formal experience of recruitment processes, didn't have CVs, had been victims of modern day slavery, you name it. You can imagine what kind of people, and they were all living in student digs because there were no students in London. And we placed 45 of them into work. 78% remain in work 2 years later. We're still in contact with a good deal of them. And through that, we did a whole load of profile raising. And all of a sudden, we're having organisations like Warner Media come to us and say, can you help with our early careers program? Or we work with lots of sort of, high street brands or global brands now that I just would never have thought I'd be able to partner with. Because what we offer 4 different things, a solution to the skills and labour shortage, a solution to big businesses' diversity woes, and small and medium, we work with all. We offer opportunities to create social value, which is something you need to be able to do over here to get contracts, or to remain on the supplier lists of, the big guys. And so we sort of tick lots of boxes: recruitment, diversity, social responsibility, social value, and ESG is a new one. So we help with the social pillar of ESG. So now we've got, I don't know how many employers on our books, but we're brokering opportunities for our radicals, that pay from ranging London living wage to, I think, 120k is our biggest, most high salary that we've negotiated. And we've placed people in all manner of disciplines and sectors. We're on the PSLs of some multinationals and global brands. We're getting asked to work with organizations that don't, that want to do radical recruitment across Europe. It's bizarre how things have changed, but I think it's definitely a testament to how big business, or what big business is committed to and how they're going about it. So yeah, really exciting for
And
us.
it goes back to what you said about the pandemic. You touched on how people rolled their sleeves up and businesses just, got in and looked at how they can help. I've got a chapter in my book called Acts of Love during a Pandemic. And literally it's just all these different examples of how businesses just stepped up. It was like, what can we do? Who can we help? Who are the most vulnerable that need help here? Who are the homeless? Hotels actually, looking after the homeless and domestic violence victims and things like that. And I don't know, Emma, I reckon it goes to this human truth that I reckon people, I think we're hardwired to be decent, right?
Yeah.
But society, has set us up to just kind of gloss over that and get on the treadmill. And we just don't have time to look beyond that. So the pandemic has disrupted that somewhat.
Yeah, I would agree completely. I mean, I think, but it starts with school. Think about like what success looks like, what we're taught to believe success looks like. When you go to school, you study by yourself, you compete against everyone else, and the most successful people are the ones with the highest grades. And it doesn't matter if you've helped out the student sitting next to you. No one pays attention to that when they're struggling. It doesn't matter how you get to where you get. It's at the end of the day, it's how well do you score on an exam. That's designed for a certain type of person. It's designed for neurotypical brains who are academically inclined and get all the opportunities in life typically. And that translates into sort of how we operate in the business world as well. It's like this whole piece around like values. I think we don't think enough about. I think it's changed a lot since the pandemic, definitely. But how you do what you do and what you achieve when you do what you do are equally as important as far as I'm concerned. And if you have to sort of kneecap someone, step over them to achieve success, then for me that's not success. You know what I mean? I think that's what we're taught. The fastest person wins a race. The strongest person wins the lifting competition. The loudest person gets heard.
And it breeds FOMO, doesn't it? Because it's that fear of missing out. It's like, okay, I've got to conform. I've got to do, I might but want
again,
to.
I mean, you're taught to conform in school, aren't you? It's like you've got to be there at 8:45. You've got to wear the uniform. You've got to put your hand up before you speak. You've got to ask to go to the toilet. All of these things, and that translates into the word work. You're not taught to love in school. You're not taught to be kind. You're not taught to, give people a hand up when they fall down. You're not taught those things. I don't remember ever being taught like the fundamentals of being a great human, being curious, asking questions, being empathetic, unconditional regard, congruence, these types of things that, I mean, we bang on about this at Radical all the time. That's what great leadership is for me. But you've got to be human to have those, to practice those skills. And I don't think, like you say, we're taught that they are the skills to lead with.
We're brought up with a scarcity model, that there's not enough pie to go around, so we've got to fight for it. And
what a load of shit, though, isn't it?
It is.
I mean,
it totally is.
Load of shit. I think the other thing that we forget is doing something loving isn't for the person you're loving. Always, there's a mutual exchange that happens, and it's beautiful. When I first started Radical, I relied on the kindness and the love of strangers that I plucked off LinkedIn to help me get our radicals ready. So I would have 20 odd people who I didn't know, who were typically recruiters or seasoned hiring managers, in a Zoom room, helping, 10 odd radicals prepare for interview, or, rework their CVs or have coaching conversations and these types of things. And ironically, I had so much engagement with volunteers from the business world during the pandemic that has absolutely petered off now that we're back to normal.
Yeah.
And it's a real shame. But my point was that these people got so much out of those acts of love. So much out of those acts of love. I know that because they came back time and time and time again. We delivered thousands of hours in that first year of the plague of volunteer support. We supported hundreds of people, radicals, to regain their confidence, to build their CVs, to think about, what their life could look like, to secure jobs, to sustain their placements. And, you get the warm and fuzzies, you learn new skills. It's loving is a mutual exchange often. It's not a one-way street.
It's I interviewed someone else on this podcast, Sandra Treadwell, and she shared the concept of Ubuntu, the African concept. Are you familiar with it?
Tell me.
It takes
a village.
Well, it's the idea that we're all connected, and I exist because of you. And if you're unhappy, I can't be happy. And, it is just that basic humanity that we have to look after each other if we're all to thrive.
Absolutely.
And
but I mean, I totally agree. It's funny. I'll give you an example of what that means in radical terms. It costs £21,000 of the taxpayers' money to leave a homeless person on the streets for 3 months or more.
£21,000.
Yeah, on average, yeah, for 3 months or more. So
wow.
Every year per annum. And so it makes that's our taxpayer money. So it makes really good sense to love homeless people, especially those who are living rough on the streets.
Yeah.
Because a little bit of love, and we proved it with that project we did with the GLA. We placed 45 people, 78% are still in work 2 years later.
Amazing.
They're now paying taxes.
Yeah.
They're now living healthy lifestyles. They're now not, using up the time and the resources of emergency services. They're, it's all these things. And just because, 6 months of a little bit of respite and the support they needed, that's all they needed to get their lives back on track. And these people have been homeless for, some of them over 10 years. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes economical sense. It makes good business sense for everyone just to do a little bit more to help each other, because it's in everyone's best interest.
Absolutely. And I'm interested in your clients. So your best placements. Tell me about the clients of your best placements. You don't have to name them, but what I'm curious about is, are they where are they coming from? Is this about box ticking? Is this about diversity quotas? Or is this a genuine commitment to we do value diversity and we want to do this right?
The challenge with answering this question is that we're working with whole organizations, and not everyone within those organizations shares the same drivers, motivations, commitment, beliefs. So it's really challenging to answer that question with any sort of accuracy. I think, largely speaking, organizations come to us because it isn't a box ticking exercise, that they are committed to diversity. Whether or not they are ready to attract, engage, recruit, develop, support diverse people, whether they even have a good understanding of what diversity means to them, is a whole nother question to be answered. But I think, largely speaking, nowadays, and this might be because of the way we position ourselves on LinkedIn, which is where we get all our leads, we are not bid candy. We are not your box ticking diversity partner. So we don't tend to get a lot of inquiries from organizations who need help ticking a box. And actually, since we started charging for our services, the inquiries we get, we find are far more authentic and genuine in the context of their commitment.
I imagine your LinkedIn profile has a lot to do with that, Emma.
Yeah, I mean, when we started, we didn't have a brand. I didn't have any, like, no one knew who I was. And this whole concept of social recruitment, ethical recruitment, whatever you want to call it, was completely alien. It was mostly done by third sector organizations. They didn't do it very well, and they certainly didn't talk about it publicly. So I literally had, and I didn't use LinkedIn before then, but I got a very loud voice and I had some great stories to tell. And I didn't really care where they landed. I had hoped that they would land, or be warmly received and sort of propel people into action and get them talking and thinking differently. But I didn't really know, so I just went for it, really. And now that's sort of the place where we meet our sort of future partners is on LinkedIn. The tricky thing that I'm now faced with is transferring my personal brand over to the business, so that I'm not the face of Radical, that the team and the brand stands on its own legs. And we're slowly but surely getting there. But yeah, definitely LinkedIn has been integral to our success and what we've achieved to date.
Because you've got a very clear sense of identity. And I think, that challenge about how do you transfer that to a brand identity, so it's not just about you. I mean, clearly you have borne the brand, and there's going to be a lot of your personality in there, but I guess that is the next stage in your journey. How do you set your recruits up for success?
The people we represent,
yeah,
there's sort of two things that we do. We work with the Radical to, first understand the barriers, real or perceived, that have prevented them from getting a job in the first instance, progressing their career, or returning after a period of absence. And that will look different for absolutely every Radical. There's some key things that we always do with every Radical. Initially it's because I was a control freak, but then I learned about ATS and how challenging it is to get past the robot. So we do
ATS,
things like,
what's ATS?
Yeah, applicant tracking system. So they were brought in, they were used by initially the big Fortune 500 companies that would receive thousands and thousands of applications for, a job, which were impossible to sort through if you're a recruiter. But nowadays they're used for other reasons, like to reduce bias in recruitment processes, and by big and small companies, because they're relatively easy and cost effective to acquire. But so we do things like CV reviews, mock interviews, these types of things to prepare our Radicals. But we also have, a pro bono relationship with a psychological service. So they provide person-centered talking therapy, or person-centered therapy, and CBT, which you can wait years and years for on the NHS over here. We do sort of have careers conversations. The other day I had a conversation with a woman. She just lacked confidence, and we sort of stripped back all of her fears and her, these things that were turning to sort of self-fulfilling prophecies that just weren't real. They were just her self-beliefs, negative beliefs. At the end of the conversation, before I interview, I made her stand in the Superwoman pose. Do you know what the Superwoman pose is? Yeah. And took a few deep breaths, and then I said, "Now tell me you're a fucking fabulous woman. You're going to get this, you're going to slay this interview." And she started really quiet. And I said, "Say it again, but louder. Say it like you mean it." So she's yelling this new mantra of hers down the phone. So we do loads of different things. Absolutely obscene things to the really obvious things to get our Radicals ready. I think the biggest piece of the hardest work we do is actually with our clients. To ensure that they've got the infrastructure, so the policy and the process in place. The leadership capability. And when I talk about leadership capability, I mean not only buy into diversity, but leaders who practice anti-bias and who are trauma-informed, because everyone's suffered trauma in their life. There's no doubt about that. And then also the culture, like that culture shifting piece, so that when we do support radicals into their, a job in an organization that's been working with us, they feel like they belong and they're included, and they've got sort of a seat at the table and a microphone to speak into. So they're the things that we do on both sides. And in theory, when you do both well, people secure jobs that they love so they can build lives that they love, and they find themselves in organizations where they belong, they feel included, and they're supported to progress in their chosen careers. And we're actually seeing, we're in what are we in? Year 4 now. So it's our third, it was our third birthday
2019,
in October.
19, 20, 21, 22.
Yeah, so in year 4 now, and we're finding that our radicals that have been placed previously are coming back to us to say, I've got this opportunity to interview for a more senior role in my organization, or I'm looking to move on into something bigger and better, and we're supporting them to do that. So the model has proven to work. That was the dream, and it's now happening, which is very cool.
That's cool. Amazing. Congratulations. And I imagine it has not been an easy road at all, and just what you're doing is fantastic. I want to ask you, so you've achieved one dream to prove the model. Yep. What's the next dream?
The next dream, it's a good question. So we don't just do recruitment anymore. We do advisory and consultancy. So we go into businesses and assess the efficacy of their attraction, engagement, recruitment, onboarding, development processes. And then we help them to rip apart all of those and reimagine them and pilot and tweak. And we do that with sort of key people in organizations with a focus on sort of capacity building. So then they can go and take those skills and do the same thing over and over and over again. So we also do lots of sort of culture shifting work, away days and corporate volunteering and these types of things. And we've developed a number of training. They're not training. I hate training because I hate being walked out. I don't learn that way. So it's sort of a combination of facilitation, experiential learning. So do anti-bias and leadership the radical way, introduces delegates to a trauma-informed approach, and anti-bias, and that can be applied to all sorts of different teams and situations. Even we might be looking at just an end-to-end process. So we want to do more of that, because actually I think that's where we add the most value. Yes, we can fill a role with a diverse person. We can give you a more diverse shortlist, but actually what we want organizations to be able to do is attract, engage, recruit the radical way, and do it for themselves, so they can sort of scale up and do more than we will ever be able to do for them. So that for me is the dream, the goal. And we're doing more and more of that. And I think through that, what I want to be able to do is recruit more radical people to deliver those services and go into business and shake shit up, really, because
love that.
I'm, like I said at the start, an incredibly privileged person with very limited experience of the barriers that the people must face day to day. And I'm not the most credible teacher, and I'm certainly not the most credible speaker. And I want to give more radical people opportunities in our business to go and make change for themselves, because that's essentially what we're about.
What a radical thought, and what a wonderful way to shake things up and just create more empathy in business, more opportunity for people, and the ripple effect that you talked about, not just on those people's lives themselves, but their family and communities, is extraordinary. Emma, thank you so much for joining us. I know you've got a full day ahead of you, so I am going to let you go, but I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing the radical story with us.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure. I'm so sorry it took so long to get here.
Doesn't matter. You got here.
We got there in the end. I really appreciate you having me, and thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the For Love and Money podcast. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into the purpose movement, visit us at thecauseeffect.com.au. And remember, doing good is good for business. So if you're not doing good, then what are you doing?